Hi there everybody, welcome to today's Art of Procurement, and it's Independence Day week here in the US. So what I thought I would do today is actually go back into the archives and replay one of my solo shows that I recorded about 18 months ago now. It's a topic that I remain really passionate about. It's about why I think we in procurement should care less about being best in class, and chasing the notion of best in class, and more about what our internal organizations really need from their procurement function. So I'm going to roll the tape on that. I will be back next week with another great interview show. If you're in the States, have a great 4th of July week.
Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
So today I want to talk about an issue that may be a little contentious, and that's the concept of best-in-class procurement. So I do a lot of reading around procurement and next-generation strategies, trends, tactics. In doing so, you really can't avoid the notion of best-in-class procurement benchmarks. I've always found that I've struggled with the notion of best-in-class and what best-in-class procurement is. I think that it's all well and good in terms of looking at it in ways that you can better yourself, better your department, your capabilities, look at some of your outcomes of your organization. But, I've always kind of questioned to myself, is best-in-class the concept a fallacy? Is it does it present a utopian vision of something that's not really truly achievable? My thoughts really, in all honesty, is that most companies should not really be pursuing a best-in-class out the gate. For companies that are already in the top quartile of in terms of procurement performance, then sure, using best-in-class benchmarks I think offers an interesting guide and maybe a target to really help you in looking at continuous improvement. Where should continuous improvement efforts be made? But for companies that are looking to improve procurement performance or capability, if you're not already in that top quartile, then I really recommend you focus on becoming something, what your organization needs as a procurement function, and also taking into account available investment dollars rather than pursuing some concept of best in class. So just a little story. So early in my career, I came from a company that had a really strong procurement function. And in fact, it was known as one of the world leaders in our profession. That's because it was in manufacturing and, truly every single cent really made an impact on the bottom line that you could save. I went from that organization to one that really didn't have that same rigor in terms of the use of procurement and was really at the beginning of a procurement transformation journey. When I went into the role, I was pretty gung-ho, to be honest, about trying to really help this new company quickly transform to make them look like my old company as quick as possible. In doing so, though, my new manager told me something, and it's something that's really stayed with me ever since. And that's that if you rate the capability of our team on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of our ability, our capability, our performance, we may be 2 or 3 on that scale, but we don't really need to get to the 9 or 10 that I was wanting to take it. If you're able to improve to a 6 or a 7, say, then we have still significantly increased the capability of our team. We can use that as a foundation to push on to 9 or 10 level. If at that point, when we're already at the 6 or 7, we think that the organization would value going to 9 or 10 and there's a clear ROI to do so. But what my manager reminded me was that, change is usually incremental. Rarely does a company jump from that 2 or 3 level to an 8, 9, or 10 in a short time frame. Obviously, with the benefit of experience, he was right about that. And I actually look more recently in my career to examples where I've been working in the procurement outsourcing space. What you often see in this space is that companies outsource a lot of their procurement when they do it across categories rather than just a bit more targeted. They do it because they're at a 2 or a 3 on the scale, and they want to get to an 8, 9, or 10, and they want to do it quickly. And procurement outsourcing offers them kind of an out-of-the-box solution, a way of doing it. What I see, though, even in circumstances like this, is it really takes months to build a program and, many months more for that new service provider to start proving their value on even low impact projects. They have to do that before they can, build relationships and build trust with stakeholders. A long time before they're able to have a bigger impact working on more significant projects, ones that are more core to the value prop of their client company. So rather than chasing best in class, I'd really say, look at where you are today and think about what's important to your organization. A company that values growth, for example, or risk management, or supply-based innovation, they may have a completely different view on what they need from a procurement function over one that needs to reduce SG&A expenditure or reduce gross margins to become more competitive to sell more product. An example that I like to use is at Google, and actually, we talked on the show about this with Tim Jones a couple of weeks ago. So at Google pursued procurement best-in-class benchmarks, they would focus on, as an example, increasing spend under management. Looking at spend under management driving influence and driving cost savings and driving ROI. And they actually did that in the early days. And as a result, in their own words, they became essentially an RFP shop. They'd save money by using the formal procurement process. But is that really important to a company that's growing by, anywhere between, I think it was 15 to 35% every single year? What made Google's procurement team such an asset to their company is that, they took a step back to consider what the company really needed from their supply base. In Google's case, it was to lever the supply base to fuel the growth of the company and to bring in outside innovation. So what they did, they shifted focus to the top 10 to 15 stakeholders across the company. And remember, this is a company of 60,000 employees. So 10 to 15 is a minuscule fraction of 1% of the people that worked in the company did they focus on, rather than trying to just bring as much spend under management as they could. But they had a bigger positive impact on enabling Google's corporate objectives by focusing on that 10 to 15 stakeholders that they ever could have done by spreading and really diluting the reach of their team in the pursuit of saving money across all areas of spend. So with that in mind, when you start to think about increasing the capabilities of your procurement team, rather than look at trying to achieve best in class, then I really recommend clients consider a couple of things. And first, and I kind of mentioned it before, is understand what your business needs from a procurement function. So what's the overarching strategy of your company, and how do the internal customers, who are the stakeholders, and I stress the word customer because ultimately as a procurement organization you are a service to them, what do they need in the use of third-party suppliers to pursue their goals? How can we as a procurement function facilitate it? That should really be the true focus of your team. When you know that, secondly, make sure you have foundations in place. And some of the things I think of when I think of foundations is, do you have access to all the data or the information that you need, and the ability to turn that data into actionable intelligence? So spend analytics as an example of that. Do you have capabilities on your team that enable you to build strong relationships and really take more of a business-oriented view of how you can create value rather than a procurement-oriented view? It's not about process, it's about enabling outcomes for your stakeholders. Third one is, do you have a structure in place that enables mission-critical team members to focus on mission-critical activities and do it 100% of their time? Because if you have those highly paid, highly strategic members of your team spending 50 or 60% of their time on essentially administrative or tactical activities, which honestly is what most companies do, then you're really only using 30% or 40% of their time for them to create value, and that's what you're paying them to do. So having that structure in place really helps them be a lot more productive. Do you have processes and tools in place that bring consistency to the more operational activities of procurement? But what I think is important is that have you the flexibility to adjust them when it's necessary to meet the needs of the business? All too often you see where there's great processes in place, But, the procurement team are focused on compliance with the processes and kind of forcing the processes on stakeholders rather than taking a step back to figure, does this make sense or not? Obviously, there's some industries, and I'm thinking specifically of financial services, where there's regulatory requirements in place which really are the main driver in pushing a process, and that there has to be consistent processes to meet regulatory requirements. But where that isn't in place, while it may be good business practice to have process, and it certainly is, you need to bring some flexibility to that. And finally, do you have a governance program in place with your stakeholders? And really importantly, it's one that includes a bit of a feedback loop. So there's a mechanism for stakeholders to feedback on the value that you're providing to them to make sure that you remain relevant to the customers you serve. So I think it's really important to have those foundations in place and to have an understanding and a kind of an alignment. So only when you're aligned with your company's objectives, firstly, and when you built that platform or the foundation to support those objectives, only then you really should be considering how to improve, how to go from what you may be at now is a 6 or a 7 to something that's more like an 8, 9, or 10. And when you want to improve, in my opinion, it shouldn't be in the pursuit of third-party best-in-class benchmarks. For sure, those can act as a guide. But I really think that you should be building the function your company needs rather than focusing on something that maybe later can be touted as best-in-class. Okay, well, that's some thoughts on best-in-class procurement and kind of some of the dangers that I see of companies pursuing becoming best-in-class when not really taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of what their organization needs from them. The show notes and my contact details and a transcript from today, those can all be found at artofprocurement.com/19. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.